And welcome back, everybody. So we're talking about the Joseph Ray Daniels trial. We're going to focus on that in a few minutes, but we want to switch gears and focus on something else. There is a new book out there for all of you true crime fans. Do you remember Jack Ruby, the man who shot Lee Harvey Oswald, the guy that shot President Kennedy? Well, Ruby's incredible trial is the subject of Kennedy's Avenger, Assassination, Conspiracy, and the Forgotten Trial of Jack Ruby, written by ABC chief legal analyst and founder of our very own Law&Crime network, Dan Abrams. And Dan joins us right now. Dan, good morning to you. It's great to see you, and I'm happy we're talking about this. You know, when I was reading this, what amazed me is that if this trial of Ruby aired right now on Law&Crime, it would probably be one of the most watched, talked about, debated trials. It has all of those elements that people are fascinated with, right?
And you know, it almost was televised. It almost became the first mega televised trial. There had been one or two other televised trials, and the defense in this case wanted the case televised. The judge wanted the case televised. The prosecution did not want the case televised. And the judge got so much heat from the local Dallas community begging him not to televise the trial that he ended up effectively, caving. He allowed the verdict to be shown live, but that's it. And look, I think that was a mistake in retrospect. Look, television was new back then, right? They didn't know as much as we know now. They wouldn't have been able to, have the single camera that we have in courtrooms and be able to ensure that the protocol of the courthouse and the courtroom is exactly as it is with a camera or without a camera. But there were a lot of things that I think it would have helped if the public had been able to see in this case. The public was fascinated with this case in 1964, as you can imagine. This was effectively the Kennedy assassination trial. And a lot of the conspiracy theories that came from the Kennedy assassination were born out of the Ruby trial. Questions that went unanswered, hints and suggestions. The defense saying to the prosecution, "We want you to stipulate that Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone." Prosecutors, "We're not stipulating anything." Oh, why not? What's the reason? A lot of that kind of stuff happened in the context of this case. But it was truly a fascinating case. And I am embarrassed to say that I really didn't know that much about this case coming into this, and was just stunned at how rich the story was.
No, and I feel like there's a lot of people that don't know about it, including Ruby's defense. I mean, if you ask people, do you know what Ruby's defense was? Can you walk us through that? And also, not only what the defense was, wasn't he represented by quite the lawyer, like quite the character lawyer himself?
Yeah, I mean, look, he was represented by the guy who was probably the best known lawyer in the country at the time. His name was Melvin Belli. He primarily did personal injuries cases. He used a lot of demonstrative evidence. He'd throw things on the floor and do stunts, et cetera. But he'd done some criminal cases, et cetera. And his defense in the Ruby trial was that Jack Ruby did not remember the incident, that he was suffering from a rare form of epilepsy, that he had an epileptic event, and that Jack Ruby didn't remember it happening. And so he didn't understand right from wrong. And therefore, it was an insanity defense. And, studying this case carefully, I think the better defense would have been the one that he was going to use when he was granted a new trial. And there's another fascinating element to this case, is that the verdict was overturned and he'd gotten the death sentence. That he should have just said, yeah, I did it. I did it in the heat of passion. Because you know what? In the state of Texas back then, what was called murder without malice, what we know as manslaughter in most states, up to 5 years. That's it. No more than 5 years in prison is what Jack Ruby could have gotten if he'd gotten this murder without malice.
Yeah, and you talked about it, what the scene was like back then, how a lot of people were looking at it. It was also impossible, right, to get a jury because so many people had opinions on this. I mean, we deal with that kind of issue here. We just did the Derek Chauvin trial. So what was the scene like back then in trying to get people who didn't have an opinion about Jack Ruby?
Well, it's a very good comparison, Jesse, to the Derek Chauvin case in the sense that in both cases, the vast majority of the jurors had seen the victim die prior to the trial. The vast majority of people in the Derek Chauvin jury pool had seen the video. The vast majority of people in the Jack Ruby jury pool had seen the video. And in fact, in this case, the defense argued none of those jurors should be able to sit on the case. They were eyewitnesses to the crime, and therefore they shouldn't be allowed to be jurors. It was not a successful argument, but it sure was an interesting one in the context of the case. This was, you have to remember how big this was. When we think about the Derek Chauvin trial and the country was watching, et cetera, that was nothing compared to what was happening in the country with, effectively 3 television stations, a limited number of newspapers, et cetera, with everyone covering the trial of Jack Ruby.
But there was that's true. But also, wasn't this one of the first trials that kind of introduced videos and photos of the actual incident? Because we hadn't seen that before. Now it's commonplace. But isn't that one of the more unique aspects of this?
Absolutely. And the fact that the video became a critical piece of evidence was new in the criminal justice system. Television was relatively new, not brand new, but relatively new at the time. People will tell you who were alive at the time that after Kennedy was shot, everyone in the country went to either a television or went to a friend's house of someone who had a television, or went and watched it at a storefront where they had a television, or listened to it on the radio. That it was the thing that everyone was focused on when Kennedy was killed, and the fact that they had this incredibly important piece of evidence, right, of Ruby shooting Oswald, and the defense wasn't, it's not me, made this one of the first trials where a piece of video, and certainly it was the first time a murder that had happened live on television was tried. So absolutely true.
The very first page of the book, I predicted this in a way that dedicates that so much has been written about this, so much has been talked about what happened to Kennedy. You have to think about the conspiracy theories here, in the time frame of it. There was Harvey Oswald, and then all of a sudden he gets killed by Jack Ruby. In your analysis, in your research of this, and this book is filled with a ton of research and really delves into it, do you have a better sense of why Ruby did what he did, or what happened exactly that day? Because again, a lot of people have theories as to what Ruby's role was in all this.
Well, look, one thing I can say with confidence after studying this case, and I didn't feel this way before studying this case the way we did, is that Jack Ruby could not have been part of a conspiracy. And the reason I say that is primarily based on the timing, which is on the Friday when Oswald's arrested, the day Kennedy is shot. He's brought to the police station on Friday night. Oswald crosses paths with Ruby. Ruby's at the police station that night. And Ruby doesn't kill him. Instead, Ruby's offering commentary during a press conference from the DA about exactly what Cuban organization Lee Harvey Oswald has been part of. Jack Ruby always wanted to be the center of attention. If Jack Ruby was a hired assassin, he doesn't kill Oswald the first opportunity he gets. He lets Oswald go and talk to the police for a couple more days. It doesn't make any sense. And then on the day that he does it, which is 2 days later, the press and everyone was told 10 a.m., Oswald's going to be moved. Everyone's there waiting for the big 10 a.m. move. Jack Ruby's still home. He doesn't come to this area until over an hour later, and only because a woman who had worked in one of his clubs had begged him to send her $25 at Western Union, wire her money. So he goes to the Western Union, gets a receipt for $11.17. We're now an hour and 17 minutes after Oswald's supposed to be moved. And he walks the 100 yards over to the police station to see what's going on, walks in the garage entrance. Literally 30 seconds to a minute later, Oswald is brought out. Ruby always carries a gun with him. He shoots and kills Oswald at that time. And also, I should say, he had left his precious dog, who he often referred to as his wife or his child, which was, he had a sort of obsession with his dogs. His favorite dog in the car when he went to the Western Union. And anyone who knows Ruby says, if he had been planning to kill Oswald, he never would have left his dog Sheba in the car.
That's incredible. The piece is just filling in at that very moment. It's one of the most shocking aspects of this. And what also I found surprising was that a lot of people don't know about this. You had mentioned that. What are you hoping people learn from this book about the trial? You know, they talk about maybe the trial didn't get enough attention now because it was in the shadow of what happened to JFK. What are you hoping people learn from this book about the trial?
Well, look, I think it was a really important case. I think that there's still an enormous amount of talk about the Kennedy assassination. And some of it really isn't based in fact. I think that the Ruby trial is an interesting trial just about, the insanity defense. But I think that it's, in my view, and my co-author doesn't necessarily agree with me about this, I think that the lesson on this is that a high-profile lawyer can really screw up a case if he doesn't play the odds and instead tries to be the hero. And I think that's what happened with Melvin Belli here, is I think that he wanted to be the guy who got Jack Ruby acquitted, rather than just the guy who played it safe and got Jack Ruby out in 5 years, which in and of itself would have been, unbelievable. And I think was totally achievable. So I think there's a lesson for lawyers here, particularly in high-profile cases, which we cover on Law&Crime Network all the time, which is, to be careful and to think long and hard about the defense and think about your client first and not about yourself.
Well, it's a great read, Kennedy's Avenger. Dan, thanks so much for coming on. Wishing you the best of luck with the book, and hopefully a lot of people pick it up and take a look at what really went down with Ruby's trial. So, Dan, thanks so much for coming on.
Thanks, Jesse.
All right, everybody, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we'll focus on the trial that we're covering right now, and that's Joseph Ray Daniels. Stay with us.